If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series on family cults and beyond. In part 1, guest Brendan Whyatt talked us through his early life growing up in a family cult with political ties and the difficulties in escaping. In part 2, we will be discussing Brendan's descent into other cultic groups before embarking on a journey of cult education, research and work. To find out more about Brendan's work, you can follow the links in the episode description. For early access to full-length ad-free episodes, you can support the podcast from £1 a month at patreon.com/The Cult Vault. But for now, here is Brendan. Do you think that your experiences throughout your childhood made you more susceptible to a high-demand group by the time you arrived in India?
Oh, absolutely. There was a recognition. There was a recognition from me, and there was a recognition from the people in the cult. You know, these cues, responses that you get through interaction with people are going back to the thing about them being maybe subconscious or unconscious. I like to use the word subliminal because, in essence, the whole process people go through in brainwashing, the thread of it is through hypnosis. You know, and it's that links the people, it's that connects people up, and it's just the recognition of it. Again, you know, I got out of this situation that I was in my family. You know, I wanted to release myself from this identity of being the working class person from Oldham, you know, being oppressed by British society, you know, the class divide, and all these things, these old things going on in my head still, you know, that were, you know, considered to be normal. You could have a conversation with somebody about it and think, oh yeah, this guy's just some normal working class guy. I wanted to release myself of all that. I had all these spiritual beliefs that I'd adopted because I'd gone through processes that I would have considered to be like spiritual experiences to help my healing, which I can condone. You know, to this point, I would say they had some validity in them. They definitely had, and they still do. I'm as spiritual now, I could say, as I ever was. I understand the difference between spiritual growth and spiritual damage or spiritual abuse, which is what I was sort of subjected to in the Rajneesh cult. So there was a recognition from my side, and there was a recognition from their side too, and that's why I was accepted into the fold. Definitely.
What year did you arrive over in India?
So I was traveling through. I'd gone from Thailand when I was working there. I was advised by a friend to go to Nepal first, and then gradually work my way through to India. So I went to Nepal. I went trekking, and as I was, you know, I was still drinking. I was smoking drugs. I was doing all sorts of stuff. And then I went down into India, traveled overland. From it was 95 in Nepal. I went from 96, and I went through to, it was still 96. It was the summer of 96, and I got, it was a wet season they call it, and I got into India then, and let me think now. No, so it was 95, and then I was in India in 95, and I walked up to the door of the ashram, and this guy called Sure, I ended up with a job. I worked there for about another 2.5 months, and my visa ran out. So I went down to Sri Lanka, and I got another visa for 3 months. I got back in Asham for about a month and a half, and that's when somebody who was an Indian, Yassins at the time, was jealous because I'd supposedly become this enlightened being, which is rubbish. And he reported me to the inner circle, and then that's when I got booted out. So I ended up back in, actually went back to Oldham, my hometown. I was back in Oldham sort of 96, October, November 96. I was back there, sofa surfing, working, and have you. And then eventually went to London in 97, where I met my wife, and I joined another offshoot of the Rajneesh cult, a way of trying to get out of the cult.
So you arrived in the mid to late 90s in India, and you're finding yourself at the doors of this ashram. Now, it's my understanding that Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh moved over to America in 1981. Then he moved back to India to a different location from the original Poon ashram. He moved to a different place and died in 1990. So he would have already been dead by the time that you came
Yes,
across
yeah.
this ashram. So this was his legacy that you were stumbling across
Yes, I was
in a part
stumbling
of
across
India.
his legacy. Can I just say a little, just an aside at the moment? There's a couple of things here that I'm kind of stumbling a little bit. I ended up with, and I won't go into the full details, but I ended up with PTSD last year, 2021, and I've still got PTSD now, and I'm working through it, and this is part of my therapeutic, is to sort of speak out, to break the silence, what's going on, not just to myself but to others too. So there'll be a slight, I might stumble a little bit when it comes to dates and times and things like that. But yeah, I got to the ashram. It was Corrigan Place. It was the place, the original ashram, that he'd returned to after being extradited from America.
Right.
It was the original one. However, he was, let's use the terminology here, not in the body. I was there. And we used to go to discourses in the evenings where we were watching videos of him. And when I'd got there, it looked more like um, a, a health spa come theme park type place than it did an ashram. But I did engage in all the meditations as a dutiful disciple would do, and watched all the videos and completely got taken in by his doctrine and his hypnotic ways
Mm-hmm.
that have been numerously catalogued by
Yeah.
people like Jan Alex that you mentioned earlier, Margaret Singer, and all this guy was a master at manipulating people. Yeah, energetic darshans, music, all sorts of things he used to hypnotize people, and he had me because I was easy game. I was still at the effects of the abuse from a yeah. I walked around with the maroon robes on, singing and dancing, being happy, smiling, celebrating. Oh, life was fantastic, but it wasn't. You know.
It's interesting that the Western interest in Rajneesh really grew from people accessing his tapes and the audio of Rajneesh using this, this hypnotic way of speaking to people. And then the community of in-person interaction with Rajneesh grew as people moved from around the world to be in his presence. And then after he died, the interest or the conversion to the Rajneesh movement was happening again through audio tapes and videos of him. So again, we're coming full circle with how people introduced to Rajneesh himself, even though he's not in the body anymore.
Oh yeah, because he became a commodity. There was, it became a corporate system. And it had a copyright, had on it, The books, so-called books that he did, which were just, they were inspired from his discourses mainly. You could say they were still held in the Indian National Library, and he's considered to be he's revered as a pandit to this day. And I mean, I don't have to say I didn't directly witness sexual abuse in the ashram, but you'll have had people have come on the show and people that catalogue these things, and he's still thought of as a pandit and a genius in Indian society. So that kind of really supports my argument about what's happening in society and how things are developing.
Well,
Or
not
not.
even that. It's all over the world, isn't it? I spoke about this in another interview recently, but the rebranding of Rajneesh to Osho has been so successful that Osho is quoted in mainstream media, um, on sort of, thought-provoking philosophical type
Yeah,
tweets and Instagram posts that people put out without realizing that Osho is still the person that instrumented, America's biggest bio-terror attack. And I think that is significant in when you talk about corporate tactics being used in spiritual places, because sometimes when I say to people, you do realize that Osho is the cult leader from Wild Wild Country. No, that's not the same person, and
no,
people
no,
are shocked to find that out, which again is just successful corporate rebranding.
yeah, and that has extended out to normal society through things like large group awareness trainings, research I've recently read, without mentioning names, are a couple of really
Oh no, you can
and
mention names if you want, because I have an interview with some of these people coming up next month now, actually, interestingly.
yeah. So there's uh, John, I forgot his last name now.
John
Um,
Hunter, I think.
John Hunter, and there's a couple of others I've read that talk about these things. And like you mentioned earlier, was I susceptible to the 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 um, the entrapment that was there in in uh, in India? Did I recognize those things? Yes, but not really realizing they were a bad thing. Thought they were a good thing. Now I understand the influence that people can be under and the behaviors that come from influence more and more through my profession and personal life. I can see what's happening when it comes to like the trickle down effect of language, behavior, structures, and how that now is being filtered down into society through professions like my own. Um, I've seen very, very recognizable behaviors around cultic phenomena in the NHS, for instance, and all these things are being passed through the systems that are already in place that that are used to control people in the corporate world. So yeah, you could say in this so-called spiritual movement that Osho had is the trickle down effect now that we're seeing from people like that. But if you go back to what you were saying about Osho and the fact that he's such a really saleable commodity, is because people recognise those kind of things because they've been experiencing them now. People in social media through iconography and what's going on with social media have been recognising those kind of phenomena for 20, 30 years, and it's been taught in classrooms. It's been taught in universities. You know, so that's why they're becoming popular. And the Osho brand remains the way it does, and it remains buoyant. And the Osho mask, the psychopath mask, is still shiny as it ever was. you know?
I remember somebody telling me a couple of weeks ago that one of the most quoted lines in a philosophical sense is one of Adolf Hitler. And people just have absolutely no idea that when they use this one line, that that's the person it came from. And that all ties into everything that you've just said. I think people just don't know where these things come from, and they're used in popular culture.
And if you look at the way that cultures are being created on the internet when it comes to language there, and sound bites and fake news, conspiracy theories, and QAnon is difficult by a lot of people, and the way they've developed, it's these are pathways. These are pathways that are created in the algorithms in computer systems and computer software, but also pathways that are created in people's brains are reflected in people's brains as well, and it becomes this like instantaneous process. People want information, and it doesn't have to have any particular deep meaning to it. It just has to have some kind of thread to it, or it fits with this that I heard over there, or it fits with that I heard over this side. And so therefore it must be true. And it all comes from a system that's two-dimensional. So we're not really thinking straight when we look at these things. We're not looking at things in the three-dimensional way that you would through your right brain, through the allegorical part of your brain, really creates the visual image of what thing might be. Or we just accept it as it is. And unfortunately, that's the way that's happening at the moment, where people are being damaged by these things. So it's a psychological thing, it's a social thing, and it's for all these things are linked up through neurological developments or not, maybe. And the new research that's coming out now around how social media is affecting young people's brains proves this. If it's also being used as a way of, use a loose term, brainwashing people, where are we actually going with this? Where is society going with these kind of things? It's very scary, very scary.
So you were accused of being an enlightened being, and that's why you were removed from the group in India,
Oh
which is
yeah,
really
yeah. I was an
interesting because
enlightened being. Yeah,
Rajneesh himself was supposed to be an enlightened being. So
yeah.
how did
Well,
that go?
well, yeah. It's I think that it's part of the. This is where it's really tricky when it comes to these things like love bombing and coercion and control. Is that with that kind of thing, it's a confusion. It's a double message. It's like I'm telling you, I'm ingratiating you, and at the same time, I'm punishing you. So I'm ingratiating you because you become an enlightened being, and at the same time, I'm punishing you because I'm saying to you, you can't be here anymore because you're an enlightened being. Okay, so that's a very saleable technique, because what's happening is that it's made me believe that I'm a special person. And I'm a special person because I spent all this time and effort doing these meditations and bowing to the master. Also, but then you're kicking me out. I'm going back out into society. So, but when I go back out into society, you don't want me to badmouth you and your organisation, your corporate system. You don't want me to badmouth that. So you're giving me this identity of an enlightened being, so I won't go and badmouth you. And I see that kind of thing, that kind of phenomenon that recreated in corporate systems, in situations of employment in organisations. And what happens if somebody's sacked from a job, or or in some other ways pushed out, implicitly pushed out of a situation through bullying, or there's a term, there's a phenomenon called horizontal violence you may have heard of, that people get pushed out of jobs, and at the same time they're being told you were fantastic, you were great, you were excellent, but sorry, we've got to let you go because of such a thing. So yeah, that's a technique that's now being used commonly.
And you left India, and even though at the time it might not have been your decision, you did actually end up meeting your wife off of the back of moving
Right, yeah.
away. So that's that's kind of like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it was like, so we had a bond there. We wanted to get out of the cult, and it goes back to that thing, because I've read, for instance, with Jangel Alex and stuff she's read, the recovery stuff. You can the stuff that she talked about, the peeling of the onion, and layers. It's about taking layers off and thinking that you get to a point where you think you've left the cult, but then you take another layer off and you realize you haven't left the cult. You think you've physically left the cult, and then you realize that you're still mixing with people who are in a cult, or you think you've psychologically left the cult, and you realize that you're still, subjected to some level of influence from brainwashing or thought reform, and it just goes on and on and on. And when we met, we wanted to get out by joining this branch of the original cult. It was a Rajneesh disciple who had given himself this new identity and telling everybody that Osho is now dead, and he could help us to get away from it. But he was just a cult leader himself. He was just another guru who was using the same techniques that Osho was using, others besides, which to some degree were actually more directly damaging for me personally. And it was just a continuation of the same thing. And like you mentioned about being like these puppeteers, they just pull the strings, and they know you'll just jump, they know you just adhere and do whatever they tell you to do. But they come and go. Um, this guy was called Kyrie, and we was with him for a couple of years. He moved down here to the area that I live in now, in the southwest. But we followed him, me and my wife, and we stayed together, and we've been together ever since because we had this fun together. And it's just gone on and on, really. So it's just the cultic influences can just go so very deep that I think you need somebody else there to reflect back to you about what's happening for you. If you're a person who's a cult survivor, if you're trying to exit a cult, if you think you're in a cult, you need somebody else to reflect what you think. If you doubt the cult, you doubt what's happening to you, you need somebody else to validate your experience, because it's all trauma related, and you need validation. And that's what we give it for every day myself.
The power of validation that can come from either speaking with somebody that can tell you that, yes, those things did happen, and no, you're not wrong to think or feel that way about those things that have happened, can be extremely powerful. And in instances where individuals don't have access to a direct line of communication with somebody that's left sort of maybe the same chapter as them, or the same congregation as them, or the same group as them, for individuals who are disfellowshipped or shunned from their respective groups, I think that's where online communities can have a really, really positive impact
Yeah,
on
yeah,
individuals who can find that validation and that connection.
yeah,
You have
yeah,
your wife, and I think that that's so wonderful that you've been able to stay together despite the trauma that you've both endured in your respective experiences, but that you've actually been. It kind of reminds me of my conversation with Ashlyn Hilliard, where she talked about her and her partner leaving their group and being able to actually, through the strength of each other, recognize their experiences and begin a road to recovery through them. Whereas a lot of individuals can't reconcile that their relationship within the group was a fallacy that was created as part of the group identity. So outside
yes.
of the group identity, there is no substance to that relationship. And it's important, again, to just highlight all of the different parallels and all of the different layers to these things. So you can have relationships that exist outside of the environment and are positive and healthy, but you can also use online communities to find those connections that you might not have access to in real life. And I said in an interview yesterday that life is not binary in any category. There is nothing you can look at and say that's black and that's white. Everything is gray, and we need to move within those spaces. We can't understand everything by saying that was this person's experience and so that was everyone's experience.
Yes, the that black and white thinking is something that's quite prevalent. I think if you've been in a cult, overgeneralizing, these cognitive distortions are very common in people in cults and recovering from cults. As I mentioned earlier, and I talked about the recognition going into a cult, you need to be having that sort of rescue rope, so to speak, that connection with other people to help you out, to bring that validity and to remind you of these things. Because, like I say, I'm suffering from trauma still. The layers that I've had to go through, and I've had to reverse back. It's when you reverse a car back 50 meters. I'm not good at reversing in a car. And you have to look behind you all the time and sort of find your way, not scrape against the wall or something. And it's been hard work, reversing back 50 years, reversing all the brainwashing. And you forget, there's things you forget about your life, about reality, because you can be still trapped I still get trapped when I have a flashback. I still get trapped when I get in a lot of intrusive thoughts that want me to believe something. I still get trapped when I have dissociation because I can't engage with the outside world. So I'm still getting trapped. I understand the trap, I see the trap because I have that validated through, the work that I do for myself through survivors groups and things like that. So when it comes to cults, it's about identity. It's about having that person there who can remind you. And this sounds a bit like some kind of spiritual thing again. And in a way, you could say it's partly spiritual, and it's using the same language that they would have used in the cult that I was in. It's about reminding yourself of who you actually are and where you come from and the reality of your life, and take you out of that spell, that state of negative hypnosis that you get trapped in, and that people it's more commonly happening to more and more people all the time anyway now. Through you look at what happened in America with um, the storming of Capitol Hill, for instance, and because of the way people were manipulated online. But the connections you can make, positive connections I've made online too, that you mentioned, were very therapeutic and healing for me through survivors networks and through people and just having that recognition. It makes you feel like a human being again and not an object that's just been used.
And individuals who are born and raised in groups, they might recognize that there's a chance for them to experience this self-identity for the first time in their lives. You're talking about recalling where you came from and who you are. Some people might not have anything to recall to if this is a group that they all that if this is a group that's all they've ever known.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
again, that the tools and resources that people can access to recognize that actually the outside community is
Yeah.
not going to cause your imminent death or whatever
Exactly.
again
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tool of fear that is being used on
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that, but again, it's not, you can't just, it's all gray, isn't it? It's not just the internet is good or the internet is bad. There's like there's the whole spectrum, which is a nice way to lead us into me asking you about something a bit different. So I think that we'll be having another conversation again in the future, because there's a situation that you're involved in at the moment that is still unfolding. So we can't talk too much about it today, but there is hopes that we can revisit this in the future. And hopefully then we can discuss a bit more about your time in India and your time in this sub-Rajneesh group that exists. And that's to do with your time spent in New Zealand.
Yeah. Okay. So so I like I mentioned earlier, I was trying to get to grips with this thing about being these thoughts, these memories I was getting about abuse, and I was reading this neuroscience stuff. I've been working with brain injuries, and I was reading Alan Shaw's work and a few other people, and my wife and myself decided we wanted to emigrate to New Zealand. So 2018, we ended up going over to New Zealand in March, and it was almost like a repeat of a pattern where I go abroad, away from my own roots, so to speak, another culture, and so many things came up when I got there around my childhood and emotions around my childhood and what had happened to me, and being in this other country and living there and having sort of setting down roots there gave me the opportunity there to have this sense of distance, attachment from my life that I had lived in the UK and how I had grown up, and it helped me to clarify in my brain exactly what was going on and how it happened. And in that process, I came to a point where I absolutely knew what had happened to me, why it happened to me, and what the causes and the effects were and are in its totality. And that's what sort of spurred me on now to come into this program and speak, because it's given me a new view or a new perception, a new perspective on the world, and how cultic phenomena is becoming more spread in normal society. And it's also at the same time, like I mentioned, I ended up with PTSD, and I think of it now as a post-traumatic growth process, as is something that's termed as a therapeutic process in psychology, and in that sense, um, the there's a realization also of loss, of what I've lost in my life. I do have times when I feel really intense feelings of grief. And it's not just, it's the loss of the life that I thought I was going to have in New Zealand, um, that didn't happen. Partly was because of COVID and family deaths and things that happened to my family. And there were other reasons, which I won't go into the details of. But that loss also helped me to realise that the life I led from being from birth really was, or from what I remember from my life, was a fabrication that was created by this paedophile who called himself my father. And in that sense, it's a bit like being a second generation, because I didn't really realise normality was. And I've had to really, really penetrate deeply into society, society in order to get a sense myself and see the difference between, this identity that I had, working class person, poor working class person from Oldham, and who I actually am. And it's my
Hmm.
spirituality, and my spirituality has really, really helped me with that. It's really, really given me that buoyancy and that support and that sense of protection. Um, I have spirit guides, and I use things like crystals. I do a number of different things to help myself to heal, and it's really helped me in that way. And I think and there are people I've come across who said they've been subjected in with Ocho and with things that happened to me in New Zealand, which I won't go into too much, that relate to spiritual abuse, that help people, and it's about finding the right things. Like, for instance, it can be really complex as well. It seems really simple to find that outdoor, to find that exit, but it can also have complications too. Or the things that look like the real thing I used to do in the cult, which were around meditation and therapeutic groups that involved catharsis and uh, letting go of things, sort of in a psychodynamic way of looking at things that I thought were valid at the time, but there was just another way of, of allowing myself to be controlled. So even now, I have difficulty sitting and meditating in a lotus position or in a because of that reason, that the association with that. But there's other things I do for myself. So yeah, it's it's something that I realised that that is deep rooted in society. You have to, I think, to really understand cultic phenomenon, what's happened to you on a personal level. You have to understand also that how or why these things have developed in society too, because we're as survivors, we continue to be subjected to possible influences from the world. Um, so I think, to be honest with you, um, it's a constant process of recovery. I think for anybody that's been in a cult, it's going to be a constant process of recovery and realization and understanding of the internal and the external process. Like,
And your direction in life has taken you into further education and training.
yeah,
It's something that you're still passionate about as somebody that's considering the same postgraduate degree that I'm considering as well,
yeah,
which I know we can have an interesting talk about. But you have also developed your own company, which aims to support individuals that have had similar experiences as well.
yeah. So when I was actually still in the cult, um, I worked in a special needs school, and I developed this um, process, sense development, and it's similar to um, I think now it's similar to um, sensory modulation. It's called that would be used in occupational therapy.
Hmm.
For it's based on neuroscience. My passion is neuroscience, so it's based on neuroscience, and I've used it in different areas with people in the field of mental health, and also people with tinnitus that I work with um, because I have, like I mentioned earlier, tinnitus, and I'm seeing how it can help in other areas too. And because I'm still currently experiencing trauma myself, um, I can see that link between the external and the internal, and the necessity for that to be strengthened who's recovering from cultic abuse, and that there's barriers. between the two. There's blocks that people between internal and external factors of their life, which stops them from growing, which stops them from moving on, which stops them from understanding, having a genuine and real perception of what the world is, and being able to protect themselves from further damage. Getting rid of the bogusness and fakeness and the darkness of the abuse that you're subjected to in cult, and replacing that with a healthy, protective framework for your life. Be able to rebuild your life, rebuild yourself. Be somebody of worth in the world, and feel worthy within yourself as well. Having that positive identity.
And this framework is something that is it's explored on your website.
Yeah, so at the moment I'm mainly working with people with tinnitus, but there's a philosophy that I'm creating around my work, and there's some blogs on my website people can look at, and it's an all-encompassing philosophy that I have, which can be like the work I do, as I've mentioned on the website. I read it. It can be applied to all manner of disease and affliction that might have: physical, mental, social, and all the two are interlinked through neuroscience. They're all interlinked through neuroscience. Amazing thing, and an insight that I've got. I'm sure I can help people out there, and it was always be a relative process as well as an absolute one. So I'm aware that I'll be helping myself as well at the same time, and helping myself to grow as a person and as a survivor, and sharing and sharing my understanding and developing my own practice as well as a registered nurse, and making sure that I can provide something for people when they're going through whatever they're going through.
So the title of the work is Sense Development, is that right?
It is, yeah. So it's using this sight, the smell, the touch, the feeling, and as I mentioned earlier, you could call it the sixth sense as well, maybe. That would be used to help people. That would be integrated within the processes, the interventions, and the treatments that I would be able to provide people to help them. And it's an integrated process, so it means that then it can be applied to somebody's life in the here and now, whatever they're doing in the life, whether they're working or not, or whether they're recovering from some physical illness, maybe, as well as psychological or financial, or some kind of social problem. It's holistic too.
Some of the work that I did previous to starting the podcast
Yeah.
included sensory development with individuals who had sensory deprivation or difficulties of some type on all different levels. And I can absolutely attest to the positivity that can come from sensory development and sensory activities. And I also can see just by on paper how you could apply that to things outside of people that have sensory deprivation or difficulties. So I think that idea and framework and in itself is something that we should all keep an eye on to see where you go with it and how you develop with it.
I mean, I was just the other day, I'm working with the Deaf Association in my local city, to help people with tinnitus. I'm developing this course, and I was explaining to the chap that in the firm that we're working together, that I've done the research on this globally, and there's nobody else in the world doing what I'm doing. And so in that sense, I am providing a unique service to people, and it is about a growth process. So it's about me growing. It's about the people that come for treatment growing, and it's about the service and its philosophy growing, and it's completely brand new.
I think it's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to our future conversation where we discuss more about your experiences in New Zealand, but also where you are with Sense Development at that time we reconnect, because
Yeah.
I have a feeling that it's going to be, that I'll be able to see like peer-reviewed papers about it in the next few years and things like that. It's a really exciting idea, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where we go with it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Thanks.
that really leads us to the end of our conversation today. I think that throughout the chat that we've had, we've covered so much. What you've been able to offer to our conversation today is not only some insight into your personal experiences, but also resources and tools and advice that people can take away from this interview today and apply to their own experiences, whether it's been through cultic abuse or just general experiences in everyday typical life. So I think that this is going to be another really, really important conversation to add to the catalogue of conversations that have taken place on the podcast so far. And as somebody that is a registered mental health nurse, and somebody that also has a diagnosis of PTSD, I do respect that it must be extremely difficult to come onto a public platform and speak about your own personal experiences in such a vulnerable and open way. And also recognize that after these conversations take place, there is probably a lot of work that an individual has to do after revisiting very upsetting themes. So in order to have this conversation with me today and to offer it to the listeners, I do recognize that there is a chance you have to go back into that world of recovery and revisit difficult things. So I really appreciate the willingness to put yourself in that vulnerable position as well, Brendan, to offer everything that you've given us today. Thank you so much for your time.
No, that is not a problem, Casey. And I have to say, to put everything in the frame of post traumatic growth, it's that I have to look at life as an opportunity now, and that the more I see, the more I can see. The more I look, the more I find, and that's the direction my life is moving in. And it's about understanding, and it's just making me into a more of a whole human being, and a person. And what drives me when I get out of bed in the morning is knowing that I can come and talk to you about things like this and other people, and I can help people, and if I can help people who've been through what I've been through, that's my purpose in life.
Also to recognize though, Brendan, that through your conversations with people and through your education, it's not only helping people that have experienced this, but it also is potentially preventing it from happening to people in the first place.
Oh yeah, so that's where the research will come in, because I mentioned about doing a master's degree, and I want to also go on. I'm actually working as a full-time lecturer at my local university, and in order to be able to complete these research and to make it more valid as a global thing, as a collective thing, and not just to the individual doing treatment, but to emphasize these things in the academic world as much as anywhere else as an actual phenomenon. that it actually exists, that we're not just chatting about this on a podcast. This is actually happening out there in the world. And it's dangerous, these things that are going on, of damaging people. To be able to find ways to stop that in the first place, that is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate goal.
I think we're on to some really exciting and interesting things, Brendan, and we'll definitely have to keep an eye on where you are in a few months' time. Who knows? Maybe we'll both be enrolled in a UK-based university, studying the same course material. And I'm really excited for the potential that course holds as well. So, again, thank you so much for your time today, Brendan. I
Thank
am
you.
really looking forward to reconnecting in the future, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
And you too. Thanks very much, Casey.
Take
And
care.
thank you, all
Bye.
listeners. Bye. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this mini-series on family cults and beyond. To find out more about Brendan's work, you can follow the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.